Alright, so we're here at my studio in Utica, New York, and I want to get back to these Hing Fat Space Bucket Astronaut guys, which I call Space Bucket in reference to how the set that I had as a kid shipped in a big bucket that it would fit into, along with the vehicles that came with it. I definitely had the Lunar Rover. Definitely had the oddly shaped Lunar Lander. It's not quite the lunar module, is it? And I'm trying to ascertain where the form originated, when it originated. One thing to keep in mind is that I was born in 1967. I would have had my set by 1971, 1972. 4, 5, maybe 6 years old. And Hing Fat, the company as we know it, and we happen to be here in front of my computer, so we'll go right to the Hing Fat website. Been in development since 1980. That's a little bit late. And because I had that specific rover and that specific kind of lander, it was made by somebody else, or Hing Fat by another name, and I got them back out here because I landed these two, this grouping over here just recently. And what's fascinating to me about them is not only are they numbered on the bottom along with the made in China that's on most of them, they came with these two fascinating pieces of space equipment. I guess that's a laser cannon, and here's some sort of a radar dish or whatever, which is not a feature that's included in any of the current Hing Fat attributed space sets or any of the other space sets using their forms that I've been able to find in doing my research. And just to make it clear before we go anymore, I got out this Marx guy. There's the Marx stamp on the bottom. He's real. His foot, by the way, not exactly connected to the bottom there. And on all the other forms using that pose copied by MPC and others, that foot will be connected to the base, I believe. But I got him out to show how distinctively different he is, and his the approach to his figure is to these space bucket guys, which are sort of cherubic almost in their form. They're sort of pudgy. He's a skinny little insectoid beanpole. So these aren't by Marx. And while trolling around on the various vendor sites, looking at different sets that people have for sale, I'm alarmed by how many people say that these are by Marx. But that's a question. Did Marx originate them? And one of the reasons why I got this used bundle with these two pieces is how Marx-like they look in nature, although both of them have pivoting features on them. They're both on hinged bases, so you can raise and lower them in azimuth and elevation, or whatever it's called. And they're made of a harder plastic. The cannon definitely painted. There's no markings on them, as opposed to the figures from this batch, which all, except for the Rider guy, all of which have the made in China and a number, suggesting that they were from a numbered set. And what I was hoping is that these two machines were also part of an original set, and that maybe the people who've been copying it since the Stone Age or whatever gave up on it, on utilizing those, and just went with things like the Lunar Rover and the Lander here, because they're easier, simpler to produce. You don't have to make a little hinge on it, although I don't know. And since they're of a different plastic than the Space Bucket guys, this is sort of a flexible, I call it Army Man plastic. This is a hard plastic. And just because their colors are similar, that doesn't mean that they were specifically related. And I'm trying to find what would be a vintage original set, still sealed or with its original packaging, that some provenance can be attributed directly to when and where the form originated. Again, if I had a set of these as a kid, and I know I had the Marx pose guys as well, but I had that rover. I've never seen the Marx guys with that rover or the lander, only the space bucket guys, as I call them. This blue one came from a vendor in France. I've never seen a blue space bucket guy either, and I'm intrigued that maybe they were being distributed from China to France or to Europe directly in a different form than we got them here. I don't know. Hoping to find out. And I've got these larger versions of them too, which are painted. They just have China on the bottom. Here's two others over here, and instinct would suggest, well, those are the original guys, and then they shrunk them down to this format, unpainted for regular production. But I don't know. These are even softer, more of a vinyl plastic, and again, they just have China on their bases, as do the white guys here, which came with the used set that my rover and lander came with. They just have a China there on the bottom. The gray ones came, maybe some of the gray ones came with the white ones as well, but some of the gray ones are smooth on the bottom. Some of them also have a China or a made in China, and the blue guy is also smooth. No marks, no nothing to go with. What are they? Were these machines part of an original set of these things? Who first created them? It's easy to say, well, they were rip-offs of marks that were made in China, but again, they don't look anything like the Marx forms that are known. Even their astronaut figures, I should have gotten one of them out as well, come to think of it. Their specific NASA astronaut figures, which debuted in 1972, looked completely different from these things as well. And I don't know why people are writing off the Chinese from not having designed their own spacemen for their own space toys, and began exporting them in the early 70s once the tariff laws and export regulations on materials being exported from China changed. One of the rules of thumb that I've learned is that if the thing is marked made in Hong Kong, that usually indicates that it was made 1972 or before. After 1972, the production plants moved to mainland China, and some of the companies as well decided that they were just going to have themselves be based in China, and so the Hong Kong label sort of disappeared. You can certainly find examples of stuff made in Hong Kong through the early to mid 1980s, but the point that I'm trying to make here is just because they're made in China, that doesn't mean that they were rip-offs. It could be that this form was originated by Chinese designers specifically for export to the United States and Europe and places where there was that sort of fervor for anything involving space. Space toys were huge up until about, I want to say, 1973. Certainly by the time the Apollo program had ended, the furor had died down, although I was still playing with my space toys up and through the Apollo Soyuz. I want to say that was in 1975. And then the $6 Million Man sort of brought it all back into the fold as well, with the tie-in with NASA there. So in my opinion, it's wrong to say, well, these were just designed by Hing Fat, when Hing Fat has it on their own website that they didn't exist until 1980. And I was a kid, in 1974, 1971, I would have been 4 years old. And we can date my obsession specifically with the lunar module from the age of 4. And my parents did get me some nice space toys as a kid, which I promptly destroyed. I had a Major Matt Mason and some of his accessories. I love the inflatable tent. I'm going to get an inflatable tent even though I don't have a Major Matt Mason. so these things have been part of my life, and that's the rover I had when I was 6 years old, and these are the spacemen, the kind of spacemen that come with the rover. Those are not, and so saying that they're by Marx, no, and maybe Marx did design the forms and had them produced in China by companies that eventually evolved into Hing Fat. I'd be open to that. And again, I'd also be open to the idea that they were made by Chinese designers who just had a different agenda in mind than what Marx was doing with these guys. And yeah, they made some large ones for first. These big guys were sold to me with some Archer and Ajax figures by a vendor who stated specifically that they were made in the late 60s. And that makes sense if that was the original production model, then shrunk down to this. But the fact that they're made in China, or have that China stamp on the bottom, again, the 1972 rule comes to mind in my eyes, so that they must be from 1972 or later, which, you know, okay, the seller was maybe mistaken or fudging it a little bit, or honestly didn't know. They got them from an estate sale or something like that, and the guy's dead, so he can't tell you when he got what he got, and they can only repackage it. And writing it off because these aren't popular with the serious collectors, specifically for this reason that you can't trace provenance, doesn't mean that they're not interesting. I'm very interested in them, and not just from a nostalgia standpoint, but because of how different they are than what companies like Marx and Timmy and the Hong Kong guys were churning out. It's got a very different look to them. It's a rougher edge design. I'll write more about it on my blog, and those machines fit right in with it. They look just fine with these guys in gray over here, and I'd really like to know if anyone recognizes them from another play set by another maker. Help me figure out whether or not they belong with them at all, and whether we should just take them out of the way, you know, and simply look at the spaceman. I've got him sitting on a medicine cap, by the way, because I didn't like him on his back. It's all about art. And again, this is an art project. I don't know how this specific video would figure into it, other than talking about uniqueness of design, and that's a very uniquely designed lunar rover. I remember having it when I was a kid. I remember destroying it and losing the legs, and then I had the capsule top, and one of the radar dishes survived for a while. I can't remember the fate of the rover. I know it got rolled into a lake a couple of times up in the Adirondacks. Did just awful things with my toys, and none of the stuff here is new. It was all bought as used. So I'm specifically hunting for a verifiable vintage packaging of this stuff, including the vehicles, which I remember having, that specifically predates the 1980 date that Hing Fat themselves sing out as when they started. Were they a different company? Did they evolve from a company in Hong Kong who renamed themselves Hing Fat after? I know it's a common phrase in China, in certain Chinese dialects. There's Hing Fat Chinese restaurants galore, if you care to surf around. I've been trying for a while, and hadn't thought about emailing Hing Fat directly to ask them for some information on how their space toys originated, when their space toys originated. I think it's just as interesting, or just as important, at least to me personally, to document that as it would any of the SpaceX or the Marx stuff. What's the story behind this legacy? The Kmart item, the Kmart bargain special of space toy collecting. Hing Fat space buckets. Or is Hing Fat even the right term to use? I just like calling them space bucket astronauts. And so if you ever hear me refer to or write about space bucket astronauts, these are what I mean. And are these over here with the numbers on the bases originals? Are these without numbers the copies? Who knows? Does Hing Fat even know? Does anyone know? Well, we'll see you back on the moon base. It's all about Operation Moon Base. It really is.